You're listening to Redneck Redemption. I'm Todd.
I'm Drew.
I'm his dad.
I'm his son.
God gives everybody stories. We want to be good stewards of the stories God has given us. We may be an exception to the story rule because
we've got quite a few of them. Redneck Redemption, I'm telling you.
Yes, sir.
That's how it works.
Okay, this is a counterfeit.
Yeah, what the heck? And this dude has hair on his face. Yeah,
We
one-legged Josh.
affectionately refer to him as one-legged Josh.
Yeah, one-legged Josh.
The only guy I know that got saved at a women's conference.
Why would Andrew want to make me build a boat? It's about a lot more than a boat. You might learn something.
I want to read a passage of scripture to you guys today, and just kind of jump from there and see where the Lord might springboard us from this passage. There's a lot of reasons why this passage is on my mind today, but it's Colossians chapter 2, verse 8, and it says, "Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the traditions of men and according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ."
Well, you know, that verse goes back to something we were talking about the last time we recorded. I don't know whether it's going to be the last episode or the 4 episodes ago, but we talked about testing. Testing what you think is the Word of God.
Right.
And this verse talks about, to an extent, how to do that. It says, "See that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit." And then it goes on to say, and not according to the elements of the spirits of this world, and not according to Christ. If you go back a verse, or 2 verses, it says to Colossians 2:6 is where I'm reading from now, 2:6 and 7.
Right.
It says, "Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving." Then you have verse 8. And what he's painting there is a picture of what we talked about when we started talking about the gear story the other day. When you were talking about, this is the first time, that was really the first time you've ever heard something that clear from God at that point in your life. You'd never had that happen before. Yeah. So you walked through a series of, is it biblical? Can it hurt anybody? And could God get glory from it? Okay. And that's kind of what this thing is talking about. This scripture is talking about. It's saying, just as you received Christ, walk in him, rooted and built up in him, established in the faith. And if you're talking about testing the spirits, that is you establishing your faith and your walk with Christ so that you get to know his voice. Mm-hmm. It's just like Zebulun right now. He knows his mom's voice because he's grown accustomed to it over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. And more than that, while he was in the womb, he still was growing accustomed to her voice.
Yeah, he was growing accustomed to her voice. But when he spends too much time away from his mom right now, he doesn't know anyone else's voice. He doesn't know who he can trust. That will be built over time. He doesn't know your voice. He doesn't know mom's voice. And there's been a couple times you guys have had some problems calming him down unless me or his mom has him, because he's established that relationship through this 9-month period of being in the womb and 2-week period of being out of the womb. He knows her voice. He knows her scent. He knows her touch. He knows her feel. And that's how we should work to be with Christ. And that's kind of what the scripture is getting at, is not letting anyone trick you. Just like earlier today when you fed Zebulun the bottle.
What about it?
For a second, he was okay with it. And then after a while, he kind of started looking around. Like, okay, wait a minute. This is not where I normally get my source.
That's exactly right.
Of food.
He's like, hey, this is a counterfeit.
Yeah, what the heck is going on? This stuff isn't warm. It's not. This thing I'm sucking on isn't as soft as it normally is. And this dude has hair on his face. He started putting 2 and 2 together. And a lot of times, we as believers and followers of Christ will find ourselves falling prey to false, whatever you want to say, false teaching, false doctrine, whatever. Right. And it takes us a minute to look up and go, wait a minute, because we're so comfortable with the temporary sustenance we're getting.
Right. So we fall prey to deception pretty easily. I was just thinking about when you said that. I thought about this passage in 1 John chapter 4, where it says, "Now, it says, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits whether they're of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world, and by this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus has come in the flesh is of God." And, of course, it goes on to give a little further description. But, yeah, so there's a place for testing the spirits. Yeah. Sure enough. Because you want to, so that you're not deceived.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And the best way you're going to do that and understand the Word of God is by studying what He's already said.
Sure. So how to recognize His voice is to spend time around His voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like, all right, so if we were in a crowd somewhere and I heard you talking, I could pick you out of the crowd.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I was growing up in my dad's house, he had this thing where when he whistled, you came. And I remember one time, I don't remember who it was at the house, but somebody had come over, and me and their kid, their boy, were back. It was at Ogden. We were back in that little patch of woods over by the train tracks. You remember that?
Uh-huh.
And I remember you talking about this, and you guys walked out there, and he said, "I'll whistle for him, and Drew will come." And he said, "You think I could whistle for him?" And he came, and you made the comment, "He knows my whistle, but you can try." And this guy whistled 3 or 4 times, and no response from me and whoever it was out in those woods. But as soon as my dad whistled, I came running. Because I knew my dad's whistle, and I also knew what happened when I didn't come running.
Right, yeah.
When he whistled.
That's a second generation kind of thing, and it may be further than that, because, man, when I was a kid, my dad whistled, and that's how I knew, man, it's serious business. If he whistled, it ain't like a count to 3 and then go. It's like, get here now. You know?
Hey, you should have been here 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's pretty funny, and you learn to recognize that just because of repetition, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, in the same way, you think about this for a minute. So, like, I meet a lot of guys. I meet a lot of people on a regular basis. And, for example, when I'm teaching out the street, you know, it's a 90-day program for us. So a lot of times we'll get new guys in. And I'll tell these guys after their 90 days, you know, when I first meet them, I don't know them. I'm trying to get to see their face. But after we spend a lot of time together, I could recognize them from further away. And as a matter of fact, you know, I have to get right up on them at first and get to know them. But the more time I spend with somebody, I can recognize them from further away. Mm-hmm. And so the same thing is true about testing the spirits or you know, not being deceived by these vain notions and philosophies of men and all that stuff. Is when you know what the Scripture says, then you can recognize things from further away.
Yep.
You recognize more quickly what is the voice of God.
Yeah.
And you also recognize more quickly what's the voice of the enemy.
Yeah.
Or you recognize problem temptations from further away. And that's a really good place to recognize them, because if you wait till they get really close to you, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, and what you're talking about right here, there's also a lot to be said for the environment that you recognize things in. In the military, we do a lot of nighttime operations. And if any of you have ever used military NVGs, you know it takes a little while to get used to using those things, and even a little bit more time to get so used to them that you can look through and see someone and recognize them. Mm-hmm. It was probably 2.5, 3 years of me using this equipment before I could ever start recognizing more than 1 or 2 people that I knew really well, and it's because I wasn't used to having to draw out things in that environment. And I know a lot of people who, like myself, growing up, the environment I found myself in as a young man growing up all the way up till I was 19, 20, and I joined the Marine Corps, the environment I found myself in, it was much easier for me to recognize those things as they approached me and be like, no. But as my environment began to change, it became harder and harder and harder for me to recognize these different things, and that goes in 2 parts. One is I was not looking for them as much, right. But 2, they appear different in a different environment.
Yes, sir.
Just like my buddy Chapman, I could recognize Chapman from all the way across 160 guys walk up and, oh, there's Chapman over there. I better go stand over there because that's where my guys are. But at night, I did good. Mostly it was their voice that I could recognize. By the time you can hear somebody, you're too darn close to them.
Right.
But now in this position I am now, I meet a lot of people and I work with them for 6 months and then they go away. And I told my last platoon, I was like, in 3 months, I'll be able to recognize almost every one of you in the dark with night vision goggles on, with PBS 14s on. And most of them say, I don't believe it. 2 months in, they start walking up to me. I'd say, hey, so-and-so, hey, and call them and it shocked them. Yeah. And it really, because when you first join and you get these things, you're like, oh, they say these things are so cool, you can do so much with them, that it's very easy to be like, oh, no, you can't use that, which is a lot the same spiritually. People talk about how you can do this and how God can teach you to do that. And then you see things in the Bible where Paul would walk up and, hey, who am I dealing with? In the name of Jesus, tell me who you are, talking to someone who's possessed. Nobody else realized they were possessed, but Paul did. And you see those things, and then you get saved and you're like, I don't see this stuff. So it must not really work like that, or that must have been a special time. It's just like learning with this equipment.
That's a great point. Yeah.
They did not believe me when I tell them, if you learn to use these things, you can learn to recognize people by the way they walked, looking through it. And a lot of these individuals in this training program did not believe me at all until a month or two in, when I learned to recognize them in a different environment.
Yeah.
Because I'm not looking for the same features. Most of the time in the daylight, you're looking for facial features, maybe the way the shoulders meet up with the neck. There are certain features that will draw somebody out and get a bald spot from the back.
How far the ears stick out.
Yeah. Things like that. Well, that doesn't work in a nighttime environment.
Yeah, right.
So you've got to learn the way someone holds themselves, their saunter, their natural gait,
posture.
Posture. And I've gotten to the point where most of the time, within 2 or 3 months of working with you, I can learn to recognize that stuff.
Yeah, but what you're saying is you don't recognize that right off the bat. It takes time, it takes experience, and it takes relationship too.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
Getting used to working in that environment.
Yeah. And that's a great point. So when people are brand new believers and they just come to Jesus and they're like, man, how come I'm still struggling? Well, everything doesn't come automatic, just really fast, just right off the bat. So, some things you have to grow into and you experience. But what you were saying a moment ago is if we want to recognize these things, as surely as that's true with physical features and appearances, it's true on this level. To recognize what's truth or to recognize what's not truth, you need to really know what truth is so you know how to compare it. So the more familiar you become with the Scripture, all right, because when people start saying, man, how can I hear the voice of God? How can I know when the Spirit's leading me versus when I'm being distracted, when I'm just being foolish, when I'm trying to, and I always tell people this, if you really want to hear from God, get into the Word. I mean, read the Bible. Mm-hmm. All right, and folks say, I've read the Bible. But no, listen, don't quit. And recognize this. The more familiar I am with who God has revealed Himself as, because He reveals His ways, He reveals His character, He reveals His will in the Scriptures. And so the more familiar I am with the Scriptures, the more ready I'll be to recognize what He's saying when He says it. Because, first of all, I'll be able to know when what I'm hearing is not true because I'm familiar with what is true.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. Just like with the example I was given earlier of being able to recognize people at night, sometimes it's not that I necessarily recognize you, it's that I recognize who you're not.
Who you're not, yeah.
Because I can look at somebody and be like, okay, the shoulders are pretty narrow, so... Yeah. That is not one of the 6'12" guys. It's probably one of the 5'3".
Did you say 6'12"?
Oh yeah, the tallest person I've ever worked with.
We're not editing that
out. You're not one of these huge linebacker dudes who join.
Right. I don't know if this is true or not, man, but I have heard people talk about those who really work to recognize counterfeit money, and the way they get prepared to recognize the counterfeit is not by studying the counterfeit, but by studying the real thing. And the more familiar you get with the real thing, the more obvious it becomes when you come across something that's not the real thing.
Yeah.
And so, hey, and that's why, even in this broadcast, even in this podcast that we're working on, the whole concept of us being a redeemed people and just just trying to be real is just that. I don't want to put on a front for somebody or be fake, or I can't afford just to put on an act.
Yeah.
All right. I want to be transparent. I want to be real because I'm following a real Jesus in a real world. So I got to be real about it.
Yeah. And see, you want to talk about stories of seeing real stuff? We had this individual who had gotten saved. He was relatives of some friends of ours, and he needed a place to stay.
Yeah, okay. We'll have to get him on here sometime,
Oh,
man.
yeah.
You talk about line up the show. That makes things wild. Oh, my word. Yeah. What are you going to say about getting real? What are you going to say about him?
I was going to let you kind of tell the story from there.
Man, Josh. This guy's name is Josh. Josh sort of became my son almost for a while,
Yeah.
and really looked at him as kind of a spiritual son, and for a season he looked at me as a spiritual father, and maybe in some ways sort of still does, but I think at this point maybe it's more like spiritual big brother or something like that.
Yeah.
Because and it's funny that you bring up Josh when you remember when Josh moved in with us. So
Yeah,
this dude, let me tell you, I'm going to get him on here someday, man.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
have him tell
100%.
some stories. So this guy, he got saved he's the only guy I know that got saved at a women's conference. Okay, yeah, right. So my wife and his aunt and uncle, his aunt. And a couple of his family members, my wife and these other two ladies, they used to have this singing group called Trinity River, and so they traveled around, did a lot of different things, and my wife speaks at women's events, and so they were invited to do this women's conference, and right about this time, Josh, I can't remember how old he was, early 20s, and he was just at the place where God was just getting a hold of him, and he had maybe gotten in a little bit of trouble, and so he goes.
Takes a little bit of trouble.
Right. Well, we'll leave that right there. But his uncle Johnny was the piano player that would go travel with my wife, and his wife was one of the singers too. So he'd go with him and play piano. So he just took Josh with him on this trip, and they did this women's conference, and Josh got saved there. But shortly thereafter, Josh comes to the house, and he's like, Brother Todd, man, I gave my life to Jesus. Man, so stuff has got to change in my life. And he said one of the coolest things. I've repeated him 1,000 times on this because he said, man, I need a place to stay. And I'm like, I don't know why you telling me that, crazy sucker. But
And at the time, we had we were living in a parsonage in Genoa, Arkansas.
yeah,
Genoa,
in the school district there, yeah.
Oh yeah, in the Genoa, I can't talk. Genoa, Arkansas school district, and we had a three bedroom, 2-bathroom house at the time, unless I'm mistaken.
No, you're right. I forgot about that.
With 4 boys and you and Mom.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sure did. And so we were pretty well loaded up in that house.
Were.
I mean, technically, it was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, but we only used 3 of the rooms for bedrooms because one of them was the office / schoolroom / whatever else room. So anyway, we didn't have a whole lot of room, but at any rate, Josh wants to move in, or Josh needs a place to stay. Yeah. And I said, man, what are you talking about? He said, well, man, I'd be a fool to think that I can go back to where I've been and not go back to where I've been.
Yeah.
Now, man, I looked at him and I thought, well, that makes common sense, And he just said, well, I mean, seriously, he said, isn't that the definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and expect different results? He said, man, I ain't gonna try to diss on all my old friends, but I do know this. I can't still live where I've been living and think I'm going to be living different. And so, man, we agreed to let Josh stay with us for a week or two, and that week or two turned into a lot longer than a week or two.
I think it was 3 or 4 years, 2, 3.
Well, it probably seems that long to you. Josh will get a kick out of it when he hears you say that. It seemed like 3 or 4 years. No, Josh lived with us for right at a year.
Before you say he lived with us for a year, when he moved out, he had a closet there still, and he darn Josh is he's missing a leg, and he told me.
We call him One-Legged Josh.
Yeah, One-Legged Josh.
We affectionately refer to him as One-Legged Josh.
Yeah, One-Legged Josh, and that he's some of his friends, including me, sometimes call him Centipede because back whenever he didn't have a place to live, if he got a new prosthetic leg, it just kind of stayed where it was for a while. And I remember after he moved out, I'd open that closet to grab a coat or something, 2 or 3 legs would fall.
Well, he said something. No, I told him this, man. He's talking about being real, and that's how we got on this conversation about being real. I told him this when he said, because I said, okay, look, Josh, I've talked to Debbie. You can stay with us for a little while till you can get your feet on the ground and find a place to stay, And he got so excited, man. He was like, "Oh man, I get to stay with Brother Todd and Miss Debbie's going." I thought when I saw him so excited about living with us, I thought, "Oh man, he's got a rude awakening coming." So I sat him down. I said, "Look, dude, before you spend one night in my house, I need to let you know something." I said, "Josh, if you need me to be who God has let you think I am, you don't need to come move in my house." And really, think about that for a minute, because being in my position, or even in your position, I think it's true in anybody's position. When God uses a person in someone else's life, there's always people who think you're different than you really are. And for some reason, at different stages in our spiritual maturity, God will put somebody in our life, and He'll allow us to see certain of His character traits in them, and He'll use that person to draw us along. But I never want anybody to put all their eggs in this basket, because I know I'm going to let them down, because a lot of people's perception of the preacher and of the pastor from the pew is that, this guy's a guy that's got it all together, and he's perfect, and he's all that. And so I needed Josh to know, look, if you need me to be, he was so excited to be in Brother Todd's house. I said, if you need me to be who God has let you think I am, you probably don't need to move in.
Needless to say, he learned a lot.
Man, we got a bunch of stories of crazy things that happened during that year he was there. But when he left, he made a statement. He said, "You remember what you told me before I moved in?" He said, "You weren't wrong about that." But that's a whole. Here's a dude. We're talking about a guy that's just real too, and he's not trying to put up a facade or a front. He's just a guy that Jesus got a hold of, and he's still changing his life. We're all kind of growing and in this process, but man, God brought him into our life and just made a blessing.
Yeah.
He's still in. And that when Josh moved in our house, I don't know if you know this or you remember this. When he moved in our house, he didn't have anything. Everything he owned, he brought into our house in a black trash bag.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And by the time he moved out of our house, he moved out because he was getting married.
Yeah.
Well, he got married, and since that time, man, the Lord has given him a wife, a home, a family. He now has 3 kids and a business. He's a plumber. Anyway, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Cool to see how God changes real people. Anyhow.
But if you want to see one of the most real down to earth, and I've heard a lot of people tell me about you, man, that's one of the most real down to earth preachers I've ever met in my life. But you want to talk about see a real down to earth kind of guy, Josh Campbell will be the first one to tell you, listen, man, I ain't got nothing figured out. I just trust him, and he does the rest.
I'm listening to you talk, son. I'm thinking about Josh and some stupid stuff we've done. Thinking about the electric fence and all kind of crazy. But I'm listening to you and listening to myself. when we started talking about, when you said, Dad, we could call this thing Redneck Redemption, I think I might have said this in an earlier episode, because at some point in my life, I did not want to be known as some country hick redneck kind of guy. And that's really not my goal or our goal. We're not trying to sound off. But also at some point, I had to become more realistic. And one of the most painful things I've ever done is listen to myself preach. Because I think I sound one way, but I really sound pretty much another way.
Yeah.
And so, man, it crushed me to hear how hick I sounded. Well, I don't know why you're laughing. That's not that funny. But
I can, to an extent, I can sympathize with you almost.
Yeah.
I knew how hick I sounded.
Yeah, I really thought I must have sounded extremely intellectual today, and so I brought the recording of the service home and listened, and I thought, oh my word! Matter of fact, it made me almost not want to preach for a while. Oh God, leave me you song. But at some point, I had to wake up to the fact that I need to be more realistic with myself about myself.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the thing I wanted to run from sometimes was the very thing that drew people to us. And
I mean, that's true for a lot of things. There's really one way I want to go with this, but what we were talking about the other day about in our weakness He's made strong.
Right.
Not to burst anybody's bubble or their opinion of my father. He's not a very intellectual kind of fellow.
Hey, I'm going to edit this part out now. I'm the one that controls the editing.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll turn it over to Jonathan real fast. You didn't grow up There's nothing special about the way you grew up. There's nothing special about. No offense. There's nothing special in your background that makes you amazing except for Jesus. And just like we were talking about with the bows the other day, it doesn't matter how beautiful those curves or knots or whatever is, that bow will never be able to take credit for its ability to launch an arrow.
Right.
With that knot in there. It's a testament to the bowyer and the skill of the master who created it for a purpose,
right?
Not the bow. So bows have been basically becoming more a part of my life for the last year and a half, because like I told the story in the first initial podcast we did was, a guy told me, hey, I want you to build a bow. And then I would have disputed it, but there's almost no doubt in my mind now, just because of the doors that have opened with it.
So let me ask you this: when you first started with it, you did not tell your wife for how long that you thought God told you to build that first bow?
I don't.
Long time.
Yeah, it was a while. I think I started the whole process in April-May timeframe of 2019.
Yeah. And
it was January before we had that whole conversation.
Yeah, but at first it might have sounded like, well, this is a convenient. Maybe you were checking yourself, to see, is this just a convenient excuse me to blame God for me wanting to make these bows,
Well, yeah, because it's been on the back of it's been on the back burner of my mind, because one of the last things I did before I went to boot camp was try to build a bow, which conveniently my father broke. Yeah.
Anyway. Well, you handed it to me and said, man, pull it back, Dad. I just pulled it back. I thought you meant pull it back.
No, I said, check out how heavy it is. It's such a short draw length. And man, that sucker.
I just pulled it back and it snapped right into it. I felt like a heel. He hadn't worked on it but about a year and a half. But no.
But what we were talking about, getting back kind of on track here, you asked, I don't remember how we were even talking about it, but what I said was I was listening to Unashamed. Yeah. The Unashamed podcast with Phil Robertson, right. Al, and Jace. Mm-hmm. And Jace said somebody had asked him, how is duck hunting not doesn't become an idol for them? How do you keep it from becoming an idol? And it got me to thinking, I have become, and a lot of the bow hunting and bow building podcasts that I watch, they'll tell you I'm eat up with it. Like, I am eat up with it. It's on the forefront of my mind almost all year long, whether I'm going hunting or figuring out where I'm going to go hunting or just got done hunting, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, I'm thinking about it. And for me, for the last year, I mean, I didn't get to hunt the first year I did it because time, and partially just because I didn't get out there and make myself do it. But over this last year especially, if I'm not working on a bow, I'm probably some way, shape, form, or fashion in my mind, I'm thinking about working on a bow. If I'm not shooting a bow, if I'm not thinking or working on that, I'm thinking about shooting a bow, or I'm thinking about harvesting an animal with that. And for the reference of the listeners, it did not help this year. I harvested my first deer with a bow ever. Right. In my life.
Right.
And it was with a Fredbear Kodiak 58-inch recurve, glass laminated. And that didn't help matters at all. Boy, then I got the fever. I wanted to be out there every chance I got.
You got eat up with it.
Huh? Oh, I was completely eat up with it. And when I heard him, because I just finished listening to this other podcast I listened to, and if you're into traditional archery, listeners, the Stick Boys is a pretty good podcast. Just letting you guys know, if you're looking for something with traditional archery, it's a decent podcast to go listen to. But I just heard one of the guys that run that say, "Oh, I'm completely eat up with this." And then the next thing I listened to was old Jace Robertson say, "How does this not become an idol?" And it got me to thinking.
Yeah.
So the next morning I got up early and I was praying about it. And I was really praying hard about, is this becoming an idol? Am I so consumed with this bow making and hunting thing that I'm making it an idol? And I'm not saying that the voice of the Lord, whatever, it's just an impression I got. I felt like the Lord said, I told you to start this.
Right.
Be careful and mind yourself with it. And so my prayer now is that in the pursuit of building bows, hunting with those bows, hunting period, he is all over it. And that he gets more glory from me doing it than I do doing it, than I do enjoyment of doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I don't want my life to be to be about bow making. I want my life to be about Jesus.
Right.
But if bow making is a revenue that I can use to glorify him, I'm going to be all about it. and that's kind of what my prayer has been. And I mean, like I said earlier, it has opened more doors for me to share Jesus or just minister to people.
Yeah, man.
I had somebody in here the other day, and I was actually, I don't know why, but I was kind of in a mental debate about myself. You know, we had somebody here at the house. She's still here, but she was. It was my sister-in-law. She was staying with us, and she was talking about this, that, and the other, and what's going on in her life, and all this stuff. And in the back of my mind, I started messing with her. Shortly after she got here, about, I'm going to take you out to my shop, I'm going to make you build a bow. Mm-hmm. And I was messing with her for 2 or 3 weeks, and part of me thought I needed to do that. And I didn't know why. I pick on, if you don't know me, I pick on people. I'm like my dad and his dad. I'll tell you up front, if I don't pick on you, you might want to get nervous because it probably means I don't like you. I'm just kidding. And just messing with you. If you know me really well, I'm probably going to pick on you. And we were sitting there having this conversation, and I knew that she had actually had a conversation with my wife about why would Andrew want to make me build a bow. And she'd asked me while I was picking on her about it. I was like, you might learn something. You might learn something that's worth learning. And then she'd gone to my wife and been like, why would he say that? Like, what? And Marlena told her, my wife told her, it's about a lot more than a bow. And
that felt good for you to hear your wife say that.
It really did.
Yeah, but sure.
And we're sitting there and we were having a conversation. I don't even remember what the conversation was about. And in the back of my mind, it just felt like it was, I needed to take her out here and I needed to show her what this was all about. And I was arguing. I was like, all right. And I walked out to the garage and I said, okay, Lord, listen. I don't know if this is you. I don't know, but I don't see anything that's going to hurt her. Maybe a splinter or something, but it'll be fine. I don't see anything this, that, and the other. And actually, I was thinking about Grandpa, because he liked to teach people responsibility and working with their hands and what working with their hands does for their head. And he had a, excuse me, my grandfather, for those of you who do or don't know, whatever, he passed away this year in November. And since then, just like when everyone passes away, you get to talk about them, and you get to talking about them and looking over their life. And I never realized it before, but my grandfather was not a very articulate man. And if you knew him, you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. He was that kind of guy that if he said something, everybody in the room knew to shut up and listen to what Bill said. And I don't remember if you or Mom had made a comment about him. He loved to teach people responsibility. Right. And I started thinking about that. And the older he got, the more I realized he did not know. I don't think he knew how to communicate what he'd come to understand the link between working with stuff and working with your hands did for your spiritual life. But it does something. And I'm not going to claim I got it all figured out, but it clicked with me. If Grandpa realized you needed some kind of something spiritually, he would try to make you work on something, because he knew if you could he could get you working with your hands, it'd help you work it out, and not just learn the responsibility of work and pay, but the link to the spiritual that went with that. And I never realized that about him before. So I'm out in the garage having this conversation with the Lord about, I don't know if this is you, and I'm thinking about Grandpa, and I got all this stuff going on in my mind. I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring her out here. I'm going to explain the whole thing to her, and then you're just going to have to do the rest. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, the voice of the Lord opened, and the top of the garage opened up, and an angel descended. But what I can tell you is when I got done talking to her about it, in tears, she said, I think I need to build a bow. And we've not talked about anything spiritually since then, but there's a bow that's about 3/4 of the way done sitting out there.
Isn't that amazing?
And she's done 90% of the work. And I've noticed little things different, that she'll say or do. I'm not pretending I had any part in that. But what I'm saying is the opportunities to minister to people.
Sure.
Whether that be people who are already saved and just looking for their way.
And then to have, a hands-on teaching tool.
Yeah.
That first time I guess it's about a year ago or so when we first started talking about these things, and you shared with me what you'd share with your mom, and your mom had already tried to share this with me too, but we talked about some things you even gleaned from that Bowyer's Bible.
Yeah.
Which, if I realize all you guys aren't familiar with this, but there's some books called the Bowyer's Bible, and Andrew's mom was very gifted at recognizing her children's skills and interests and giftings, and she early on found this. It's called a Bowyer's Bible. It's not like a Bible, but it's the basic book of instruction for somebody who wants to make bows.
Oh, it ain't basic.
There's nothing basic about it. But at any rate,
it's 4 volumes, and it'll take you through some of the science behind it. And
right.
If you get the harebrained idea to build a bow, hearing us talk about it, and you go buy the Bowyer's Bible, don't get too involved in the science of it.
But what you described to me, though, was, and man, if this is not the way it was, don't correct me, because I think this sounds good. You described this process, or this point you came to where God finally just broke you down, and you were already kind of down, but in your down place, when you came to a place of brokenness and repentance, I remember you telling me, you said, Dad, I really. I just told God I was apologizing to God for where I'd been the last 5 years of my life.
Yeah.
Man, it as a dad, from my perspective, and especially just because of where God has our hearts, man, that moved me to hear you say that. But then when you said what was next, that God had showed you through that process of bow making that when you finally came to a place of brokenness and repentance, and you said you were apologizing to God for where you'd been, that God just halted you right there and said, "You've not missed a step in those 5 years. So there's not a moment of those 5 years you missed. I had you exactly where I wanted you," because you talked about how the archer doesn't just the real bowyer doesn't just go pick a piece of wood from somebody's stave that already got made.
Yeah. So and I'd actually at the time been reading some of the Bowyer's Bible, and in there it talks about, I think it was the Bowyer's Bible, it may have been an article online. One of the two had talked about this master bowyer and how this master bowyer was in such of the pursuit of the perfect wood to make a bow out of, that he had started planting his own trees on his own land, organizing them so that they would grow as straight as possible. And some bowyers had started experimenting with the splicing of the different kind of, I don't know if you've seen how they do that.
Putting two trees
together to make a more efficient bow wood.
Right.
And it was just like, good grief. And the Lord started revealing to me, he said, listen, you are, it was all in that moment in my garage. Because when he told me, you've been seasoning for the past 5 years, and I'll explain a little more in depth on that in a minute, even than I did in the first podcast. But I was like, well, what the heck were the first 18 years? He reminded me of this that I'd read, that these he said, you're a hobby bowyer, and you just started. You go out and you find a tree in the woods that looks kind of good, and you cut it down, and then you decide to make a bow out of it. He said, I am the master. I'm not a master. I am the master.
Yeah.
He said, if you think for a second that I didn't plant you exactly where I wanted you to, give you the fertilization and the water and the ground, I raised you up to be exactly what I wanted you to be.
Yeah.
And then when the time came, I harvested you. And because at the time I'm sitting there apologizing to God for the last 5 years and wondering what the first 18 years, because in my mind I'm thinking I've got this almost ruined bow stave, which ended up being ruined, that I'm working on, and I'm thinking this is how I look right now because of the past 5 years.
Right.
And the Lord just reminded me, he said, listen, when you cut this tree down, you've got to season it. Well, let's think about this from the perspective of the bow. Not only did I just take it from its only life source that it's ever known, I split it up into chunks of what looks like firewood, and then I placed it, unbeknownst to it, in a controlled environment so that, and for me, I don't have that, but I've been watching and reading about a lot of these guys. They want an exact moisture content in this wood, so they'll build themselves a heat box or some other form of controlled environment, and they put the staves inside there.
It's kind of like what God was telling you was, hey, I grew you up in just the environment I meant to for that first 18 years, but then we cut you down and I put you in the heat box the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I meant for you to be there because you had to be seasoned.
I needed to, everything that flowed through you that was just, if you think about the way a tree works and the way people work. Sap, moisture, all
came
that
from the
stuff,
ground it's planted in.
Yeah, all came from the ground it's planted in,
right.
And it becomes embedded in the wood. And there were things that I had grown up thinking and mindsets that I'd grown up with just because I was a product of the environment in which I found myself.
Right.
Just like any plant is, they were embedded in my mind. It's like I could, and not. My parents are not very judgmental at all. If you get to know them. But my mom used to tell me, we raised you, and she didn't tell me you're better than everyone else. She told me we raised you like this because it's better for you.
Yeah, right.
But in my mind, that translates, I'm better than every other Christian because I was raised this way. Things that were embedded in my mind. I don't struggle
you thought
with.
You had a spiritual advantage because of the environment you were raised in. And
exactly.
in all honesty, we really thought we were giving you a spiritual head start. We thought we were giving you guys a spiritual head start.
Oh, yeah.
So that you're going to go
did.
as far as we've gone and way further. But in our mind, we thought we were fixing to create some super Christians here.
Yeah.
We had some things to learn too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you gave at least me a great advantage as far as that goes. There are things like when I was talking to my buddy who is an atheist, there are things that I had completely forgotten I studied coming to the top of my head. And I just tell him, like, no, that's where you're wrong, and this is why. And man, he'd go do his research, and he'd come back to me, and he's like, well, I can't necessarily say you were right, but it also looks like you're not wrong. And there were a couple times he just wouldn't talk about it at all, and when I'd bring it up, he'd avoid it.
But still, what you were saying, though, even though you came up in just the environment God meant for you to come up in, at some point, he had to drain all of that out of you so that he could recreate you.
Exactly.
And so that you could have this new life that wasn't just, man, you can pick up here in just a second, but I'll never forget, when you came home from boot camp, and you said, and you were talking about what it was like towards the end of boot camp, the things that you expected going into boot camp, who you thought you would be, what you thought you would do. You talked about the fact that all your life you had been in leadership, and you had, man. Everywhere you went, people just expect you to be a leader. So at a young age, you were in more leadership roles than other people in your same peer group. But you recognized too that, because I remember the statement you made that day after boot camp. When you said when things at boot camp didn't turn out the way you thought they were going to, and you weren't the leader, and you weren't all of that stuff, and even on the crucible there at the last, and you were talking about how just barely even feeling like you barely even finished, but I remember the statement that you made was, you said, man, I've been in leadership all my life, Dad, but I realized while I was over there that all my life I've been riding your coattails. Mm-hmm. And you said, well, guess what? You said, they don't know you in California. Do you remember saying that?
I do now. I had completely forgot about it.
You
but
said,
yeah,
they don't know you in California. I've got to make my own place.
Yeah.
And man, when you said that, it wasn't you weren't saying anything that was condemning to the way you grew up. But in that moment, I realized that you were so right, and I wouldn't change a thing, I don't think. Well, it doesn't matter. I can't change a thing.
Oh, yeah.
About the way you grew up and the things that you experienced. Yet at the same time, right now, I realize that the faith that you have is not you trying to express my faith.
No.
God cut you to the ground, and that had to happen for you.
Yep.
So that he could bring you back. And that's why we couldn't push you back in this direction, because if we did, it would have been just like everything else. This time it had to be yours, between you and him.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. You hit what I was trying to get to right on the head. I mean, and I've had to sit through copious things of like how copious classes and stuff. I am a enlisted instructor for officers in my current billet. Mm-hmm. And I, being that,
Let me just interrupt you for a second, because I realize a lot of people that listen to what we're, a lot of people that may be listening to this podcast may not be that familiar with military terminology. And when he said that, my current billet, he's been teaching at a school for officers. Yeah. And that's basically been his job for a little while.
Yeah, for about the last 2 years. Yes. So I also get to sit in on all the classes that I haven't had before, and they talk about the way you were raised and your moral code and how all that's embedded, which was absolutely crazy, because just as the Lord starts showing me all this stuff, I start having to sit through these classes with these officers, and at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to sit here and hear all. And then as I sat in those classes, I started thinking, that makes a lot of sense. They have an unintentional bias class. And when I heard it, I was like, okay, yeah, unintentional, one of those,
Philosophy of the man.
But as they start explaining it, a lot of what the Lord was dealing with me about, as far as my thought process about other Christians who didn't have the same practices we did.
Right.
In my house, in our household growing up, we did not listen if it was not Christian, and some things that were Christian we didn't listen to. because the desire of my mom and dad was to constantly listen to things and hear things that was edifying,
right,
spiritually. And well, I mean, I went around all these Christians listening to everything that was Christian. I was thinking, man, I can't believe you're listening to this stuff and it's pointless, it's useless. And now I can probably quote just about every country song there is, you know. But little things like that started to make sense to me,
right,
because of the way I was raised. And they've got all kind of other different classes that I've gone through, and everything started making more sense because of that. And I didn't know it, and I mean, some stuff I didn't realize till I started talking about it, but it's just all orchestrated just perfectly to make me realize, just because I was raised to get a head start on every other Christian, you know, to be a super Christian, as you called it, it had its extreme advantages. But there was some stuff I picked up along the way that was just me.
yeah,
And that's just human nature.
right,
No more than it's a tree's nature. When I go harvest a tree, I can't get mad at it because there's sap and moisture in it, because that is required for the growth of the tree.
sure. If it didn't have sap and moisture, it couldn't have life.
Yeah. And therefore it wouldn't be a tree, which means it would be completely useless to me.
That's exactly right.
And beginning to realize all these things. And for our listeners out there, if you're listening to this and there are things that the Lord's bringing to your mind right now, just understand it doesn't matter. We're human.
Right.
This is a temporary world, nothing perfect here, because sin entered the world, things aren't right. And even if you think you're the best Christian known to man, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not.
Right.
Because by all odds, I should have turned out a super Christian. And I still struggle with alcohol. I've still struggled with pornography. I've still struggled with all this different stuff. And nothing that you do is going to make it right.
Right.
You've got to give it over to God. Because the next part of building a bow is shaping it and then tillering it, which is the process of making those limbs bend so that the whole limb works.
Right.
And if you don't submit to the will of the master, if you don't submit to him allowing you to bend and be shaped a certain way, you're just going to be a log of wood.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate our podcast, and get ready to hear the rest of that story and more on our next episode.